Auzubillahi minash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Dr. Farhad with the course Fundamentals of Philosophy, and inshallah today we are here for lecture number 2, and hope you are already being known about the lecture 1, which was the introductory lecture. But let's have a look what we have discussed, just as a revision or as a refreshing point. Let's have a look some points of the previous lecture. Then we inshallah will be continuing with the lecture number 2. Okay, in previous lecture, if we remember, we have basically discussed overall framework of the course of the philosophy. And regarding that, we have discussed that what are the objectives of this course, Fundamentals of Philosophy, which contents will be covered with the whole semester of this course of philosophy, and also what are the criterias or the methodology to discuss or to deliver the content of the lecture. Okay, then we also have discussed some points, some fundamental points, because this course basically is the course with the title of Fundamentals of Philosophy. We also have discussed some fundamental terms and the points of the philosophy. For example, we have discussed the knowledge, that what is knowledge. Inshallah, there will be a complete lecture for this topic, knowledge, but we just have look at the basic definition of the knowledge, and then what is wisdom and what is the relationship of the knowledge and the wisdom. And we also have discussed which philosophical questions are being raised by the philosopher when they have searched out for the queries or the concepts of the philosophy, just like who, where, what, why, how, and when. And we also have discussed that why these questions have been raised by the philosophers, and what the criteria different philosophers have used to answer these questions. I mean, when we say that what is the purpose of the man, what is the purpose of the universe, what is the purpose of having belief in the God, so how the philosophers have answered these questions. And then we also have discussed that which is the criteria to study philosophy. I mean, there are three main criteria when any researcher or any learner search out or learn the philosophical concepts or the philosophical questions. For example, it can be studied or it can be learned through the thematical methodology or the thematical domain, different themes which has been used by the different philosophers, whether they are the Greek philosophers, whether they are the Indian philosophers, whether they are the Muslim philosophers, or whether they are the Chinese philosophers. Then the other criteria to discuss, to learn, and to study philosophy is basically the methodological concept or the methodological criteria. So what is inductive, what is deductive, what is knowledge, what is the difference between knowledge and information. This method has also been used by different researchers to study or to learn the philosophy. Then third is the chronological. And when we say chronological, that means the historical perspective of the philosophy. Then when the man has started thinking about the basic fundamentals, ideas of the universe, man, and the life. So, and when it has been evolved, when it has been developed and came into be a discipline. So this is chronological study. And inshallah, because this course is the fundamentals of philosophy, we will try to discuss all, will try to cover all these three areas slightly with this course. So these are the things we have discussed in the previous lecture. Okay, when we look at today's lecture or the today's lecture or the points of the today's lecture, so today as we can consider today's lecture as a basic point or the starting point to study the philosophy. So today we are going to discuss, first of all, what is the definition and the meaning of this word philosophy, and how this word has been defined by the philosophers. And when we are saying philosophy, the philosophy cannot be completed without the philosophers, who are basically the founders, who are basically the theorists, who are basically we can call it the initiator of the philosophy or the different philosophical ideas. Then we also discussed that who is a philosopher, what is the definition of the philosopher, and what other terms are being used for the philosophers. How we can say someone is a philosopher, and also reflecting, also giving some other quality as well. Then third point, we'll look at a brief description of the branches of the philosophy, though there will be complete lectures for these branches, but we just highlight, or we just have a summarized idea of these terms or the branches, which are basically the fundamental branches of the philosophy. First of all, we'll discuss metaphysics. What is metaphysics? What is the definition of metaphysics? What is the meaning of the metaphysics? Then what is epistemology? When we say epistemology, what is the meaning of epistemology, and which domains this term epistemology covers? Then axiology, what is the basic concept of axiology, and which area is being covered by a philosophical area being covered by the axiological field. Then after discussing these terms, we'll be discussing that why study philosophy, why should we study philosophy, and what is the method the philosophers have used to discuss the methodological concept of the philosophy. I mean, in other words, we can say which are the methods of the investigation has been used in philosophy. Then we will also discuss some components of the Greek philosophy. I mean, when we already have discussed in the previous lecture that there are three main centers, rather we can divide it into the four centers of the philosophy, because some of the researchers, some of the experts includes Muslim philosophy into the Greek philosophy, but we will discuss the Islamic philosophy and the Muslim philosophy as a separate domain. So when we look at these four centers of the philosophy, I have merged the Chinese philosophy into the Indian philosophy. So which are the basic components of these four centers? We can say what are the components, or we can say the attributes of the Greek philosophy. And when we say Greek philosophy, which means we include different phases of the Greek philosophy, the foundational philosophers, the classical philosophers, Hellenistic philosophers, Roman philosophers, and then the Western philosophers, also included the Muslim philosophers as well. And we will also discuss the components of the Indian philosophy. I mean, what are the basic concept of the Indian philosophy, and Indian philosophy is based on which grounds or the foundations. And we'll also discuss the basic components of the Islamic philosophy as well. So these are the topics we are going to discuss in today's lecture. Okay, if we look at the first point, that is basically, if we look at the first point, that is the definition and the meaning of the philosophy. So this word philosophy is the Greek word, and it's basically a combination of the two different terms, philo and sophia. And when we say philo and sophia, which we means two different words. I mean, when we say philo means loving, to love, to be in love. And when we say sophia, it's basically the wisdom. So that is a really surprising thing when we say philosophy, which means love of wisdom, love of intellect, love of reasoning. So the one who loves the wisdom, the one who loves the knowledge, the one who loves the knowledge with the way of the wisdom is basically the philosopher. I mean, every one of us likes to get knowledge, every one of us like to get information. But when we are so much passionate about getting that knowledge with a reasoning ground, with a reasonable path and way, that is basically the philosophy. So loving someone is basically an emotional domain or the emotional field. But when we say an emotional field being involved into using your wisdom to get knowledge, that is basically a real concept of the philosophy. I mean, when we say the philosophy, this means when you are so much involved yourself into getting knowledge, involve so much yourself into getting the into the taking or acquiring or achieving something knowledgeable with the approach, with the aptitude of the wisdom, that is basically the philosophy. So that's why the philosophers spent their whole lives, they devoted their whole lives. Even if we talk about the Socrates, he basically has sacrificed his life for the wisdom. He sacrificed his life for the philosophy. So that's why, because their wisdom has become their passion. So this is the main definition, or we can say the meaning of the philosophy. Hope you get the meaning. Okay, some other meanings which has been defined by the other researchers. They say the meaning of the philosophy, I mean, after getting the definition of the philosophy, they says that it is the simplest. Someone says that it is at its simplest form, philosophy is from the Greek word philosophia, which means the love of wisdom. As I already said, that philosophy is basically to love the wisdom, to love the reason, to love the logic. So that is basically the philosophy. So in other words, we can say the study of knowledge or love of the knowledge, and so much love of the knowledge that you always think about thinking. I mean, it is basically thinking about thinking. What you are thinking, you have to think about what you are thinking. So this is basically the philosophy. Okay, then we can also say that as used originally by the ancient Greeks, they says that the term philosophy meant the persuasion of knowledge. I mean, not only the loving of knowledge, I'm not only getting emotional, being into getting involved to get the knowledge, but also the persuasion of the knowledge as well. And the persuasion of knowledge not for the sake of any other thing except for the sake of its own. I mean, for the sake of knowledge, you are getting knowledge, you are exploring knowledge, you are learning knowledge for the sake of knowledge. I mean, you are thinking about the knowledge for the sake of getting more knowledge. You are curious so much about getting knowledge that you basically involve into the process of knowledge for the sake of the knowledge. And this also includes or comprised all areas of the speculative thoughts, including all the fields which basically involve thought process, like arts, sciences, and the religion. It basically involves the rational or the thinking process. Okay, the other definition we can say, in other words, we can say at its simplest, the philosophy is from the Greek word philosophia, which means the love of wisdom. As I already mentioned in the definition, that you love wisdom, you love logic, you love reasoning so much that it's become your passion. And why? Because it's the study of the knowledge or thinking about thinking is basically the basic idea. You are basically being involved into the love of the knowledge. Just as Bernard Russell has said for the definition of philosophy, that he says that science is what you know. I mean, science is scientific experiments, scientific conclusions are what basically you know. But philosophy is what you don't know. I mean, you are into the attaining of knowledge, you are into the acquiring of knowledge, you are into the, we can say, persuasion of the knowledge, but at the end you don't know. And he himself indicating towards himself that when it comes to the philosophy, as a philosopher, I can say that I don't know merely enough, that is the philosophy. I mean, throughout my life, I have been learning. This is the words of the Burden Russell that he said, I have been learning knowledge, I have been taking knowledge, I have been acquiring knowledge, but when it comes to the philosophical ideas, and then I would say I know nothing. So this is basically the aptitude of the philosopher. Okay, when we say the meaning of philosophy, then who is the philosopher? The one who loves the knowledge, the one who loves the wisdom, the one who persuades knowledge for the sake of knowledge, that is basically called as a philosopher. But we cannot say the philosopher is only confined within the definition of the philosopher. Some other terms have also been used for the philosopher, just like the one who basically engaged, learn, love and practice philosophy. We can call the philosopher is the person who not only learn but also he engaged himself so much, and he learned so much, and he practiced his thoughts so much that he basically involved into the process of knowledge. So he is called philosopher. Okay, there are some other words also we commonly used and we don't know that this is basically linked to the definition of the philosophy, just like some other words also being used for the philosopher, just like some people say that the philosophers are also called as thinker. The one who thinks so much, the one who loves thinking, the one who thinking about thinking, he's also called philosopher. Then we can also call philosopher as theorist, because if you look at the chronological order or the chronological perspective, all the philosophers have somehow given any kind of theory. So they are also being called as a theorist, and they are also called as scholar. I mean, the one who is having a school of thought. So when we say scholar, that means the one who has ability to having his own thought, his own school of thought. So he is basically called the scholar. This philosophers are also being called as a scholar as well. Okay, then they are also being in Indian philosophy, especially from the perspective of the Indian and the Chinese philosophy, they are also being called as a guru. I mean, the guru is the one who is expert in making theories, in thinking about thinking. So the word guru is also being used for the term philosopher as well. Okay, they also being called as intellectual. I mean, they are so much wise, they are so much rational that they involve their intellectual capabilities into the process of the philosophy. They are also being called as an intellectual. Okay, some people also says that philosophers can be sage. I mean, when we say sage, so there is a historical perspective in all three centers. I mean, the Greek philosophy, in the Indian philosophy, and in the Chinese philosophy, these words sage, I mean sages are being considered in all these centers of philosophy as the people who are having extraordinary abilities of the thinking. So the philosopher is also being given the title of the sage as well. They are also being called as logician. When we say logician, which means the one who thinks logically, who thinks who involved into the process of thinking with the logical basis, with the logical grounds. They also being called as speculator, the one who not only look at the surroundings, but he also speculate and absorb the logical reasoning from his surroundings, whether it's a nature, whether it's a God, whether it's a purpose of life. They speculate and think about their surroundings. They also being called as dreamer, because they are those dreamer who basically not only dream, they also find out the answers of their dreams. They also find out their solutions and the theories to answer their questions of their dreams. So these are the some terms have been used for the philosophers. So in other words, we can say the philosopher is a person who offers some views or theories. Just if you look at the some philosophers, just like Socrates or the Thales and Anaximander and Examenes or Plato, Aristotle, which are the famous in the domain of the philosophy. So they have not only offered the theories on a profound questions in the all branches of the philosophy, just like ethics, metaphysics, logic and other related fields, but also given the logical grounds and the arguments to draw a foundation for these theories. So philosopher is a person who basically offers views and also define theories for his argument and for his philosophical thinking. Okay, we can also call the philosopher is a person who regulates his or her life, actions, judgments or trends by the light of the philosophy. I mean, they look at the life with the logical and the reasonable way they do have. So, and ultimately we can say the other definition is the philosopher is a person who is rationally or sensibly calm, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, that they don't react in discussing or in the arguments. Rather, they think first, they listen, they think, and then they reflect their idea. So we can say that the philosopher is a person who is rational and who is also sensibly so calm to answer the questions, to answer the knowledge, the logics of the knowledge, and especially when they are under the trying circumstances, when they are under the hard times. And one interesting thing, if you look at the chronological order of the philosophy, so all of the philosophers, majority of them were males. I mean, hardly we can find any female within the domain of the philosophy. Mainly they were the males and the extraordinary logical people of their societies. So this is the basically an overall idea of the philosopher. Okay, Isaac Newton said, because what philosopher plays a role in giving theory or in reshaping theories, according to Isaac Newton, he says, I have seen farther, it is by standing on the shoulders of the giants. So here we can say this, that if we look at the facts of the life, metaphysical facts of the life, exological facts of the life, or the epistemological facts of the life, if we look through the lens of the philosopher, we can even see farther than our own sight. So Isaac Newton is basically has given this idea for a giant, but we can say here the term giant is basically can be used for the philosophers. I mean, when we say, if we look from the perspective, from the lens of a philosopher, we can look farther, we can look beyond, or we can look with a broader vision and the broader perspective. So this is basically the role of a philosopher while giving a theory, while shaping a theory, or while giving a philosophical idea. Okay, now the third point. I mean, first point is basically the definition of philosophy. Second point is basically who the philosophers are. And now the third point is basically which are the main branches of the philosophy. Which are the branches of the philosophy remained under the discussion point of all the philosophers of the different times. So these are there are three basic, we can say the fundamental branches or the fundamental areas of the philosophical questions. They are being also divided into three main branches as well. So they basically based on three questions. Number one is basically what is what? I mean, when we say what is what, if we say it's a universe, what is what? What is a universe? Where it has been started, where it is going to be end. And when we say what's what about the man, what is the purpose of a man? Where it has been came from, where it has to go. What is the purpose of its giving him or her as a life, and giving him a purpose of the life, and what will happen to him or her when he or she dies. So this is basically the first question of the philosophy, what's what. And when we say as a human being, as a matter of the universe or as a matter of the God, what's good? I mean, we look at the universe, we look at our own lives, and we look at the surroundings. Among them, what is the concept of the good? If we are doing something, whether that is good, and if that is good, how it is good, and why it is good. So this is the second question, remains as a domain of the discussion under the philosophical ideas. And third question is basically, what do we know? I mean, if we know, what is that? If that is an information, or if that is a belief of it, or that is a justified true belief, or where it has been came from, whether it is being came from the inductive way or deductive way, or the reasoning or the argument. So these are the three questions remain under the discussion of all the philosophers. So when we say what's what, that is basically the reality. Just as I said that when we say what's what about the God, the reality of God, we are basically exploring the reality of God. When I'm saying what's what about the man, we are basically searching or identifying or finding out the reality of the human beings. And when I'm saying what's what about the universe, we are basically finding out the reality of the universe in this cosmological world and what's beyond this cosmological world. Okay, when we say that what's what and what's good, it's basically the value. What's what is basically the reality, as I said, that the reality of the God, reality of the man, reality of the universe. And second is what's good. I mean, among them, when we take the idea of a man, purpose of a man, how he or she has to live his life, that is basically the concept of the good, or the question of good, that is basically the value. So second is basically the value of human life, value of a human society, value of a human state. And third is basically, what do we know? That is basically knowledge. If we are getting information, we are getting a belief, or we are getting knowledge. So this is basically remain three domains were we can say these three questions were the main foundations of the theories of all the philosophers of all times. So these three questions can include three branches of the philosophy. I mean, whenever we study philosophy, whenever we we learn philosophy, these three domains will be the fundamental branches of the philosophy. So when we say what's what, that is basically metaphysics. And when we say what's good, that is axiology. And when we say what do we know, that is basically epistemology. So we can say the philosophy is a way of thinking about three branches. Number one, about the universe, about the man, about the God. This is basically metaphysics. And when we say what's good, it's basically the question of a good human behavior and a question of a good human society. Third is basically when we say how do we know, that is basically the question or the domain or the branch of the epistemology, that is knowledge. So we can say these are the three branches of the philosophy. Now look at these, the definition of these three branches. I mean, we'll be discussing that how philosophers have discussed these three domains, but today we just have a look the basic definition of these three branches. So the first branch is basically, as I mentioned, is the metaphysics. So when we say metaphysics, it's basically, we already have discussed that what's what. So what's what is basically the reality. And if we say reality of the all things, their nature, their big thing, their end, their start, their structure, their features. So this is basically deals with the reality. And when we say metaphysics, it's basically going into the detail beyond the physical world, beyond the physical domain. So we have the philosophers have searched out the reality of the things beyond the metaphysical world, beyond the metaphysical approach. Then second is basically axiology. What's good? It's basically the valuable thing for a human being, for a human behavior, and for a human society. And then epistemology, what do we know? I mean, when we say what do we know, it means that what is true and what is false, and how the philosophers have given the concept of good and bad, right and wrong in the chronological phases. So when we say these fancy words, we mean that metaphysics is basically the combination. It's again a Greek word. It's a basically combination of the two words meta and physika. And when we say meta, it's basically, as I mentioned, that the philosophers have always search out, they always given the theories and the arguments beyond the physical world. So when we say meta, is basically above and beyond and after the physika. I mean, when we say physika, it's basically the scientific way. When we look at the things in the scientific way, it's basically the apparent way. But when we look at the things beyond the scientific way, it's basically above and beyond and after the scientific way. So when we say meta and physika, meta is basically above and physika is basically the scientific study. So when we say metaphysics, it's basically the study of things beyond the scientific way, above the scientific way and after the scientific way. Then second is basically axiology. Again, it's a combination of the two words, axis and logia. And axis is basically the value. In Greek terminology, axis is basically given the concept of value. And when we say logia, it's basically the study or the theory. So it's basically the axis is basically the study of value, the study of good. So when we say the axiology, it's basically axis, value, and logia is basically the study. So when we say axiology, it's basically the study of good, the study of the value. And third, epistemology. Again, combination of the two words, episteme and logia. And logia we already knew in the definition of the axiology, that's basically the study of theory, the study of science. So now look at the word episteme. Episteme is basically knowledge. This word is basically being defined as a knowledge. When we study knowledge for the sake of knowledge, when we study into the nature of the knowledge, that is basically epistemology. I mean, the nature of information, the nature of knowledge, the nature of belief, and we'll see how the justified true belief, this is basically involves the study of the knowledge. So these are the Greek terms, but they are pretty well describe the three main areas of the philosophy that are recognized in all philosophical traditions. And we can say in the philosophers of all times have studied these terms. They search out these terms and raise the questions and answer the questions in order to shape a theory for the philosophical ideas. Okay, in a summarized way, if we look at the three branches of the philosophy, we can say metaphysics is basically the philosophical investigation of the nature of the reality or of the being or the existence. And we say existence, it means the existence of the God, the existence of the man, and existence of the universe. And what is the nature of all these things? Okay, if we look at the term axiology in a summarized form, we can say axiology is the philosophical investigation of the nature of the value. Of the nature, we can say the investigation or the study of the good. And we can say of the foundation, finding out the foundation of the value, judgment and the concept of the goodness and the beauty, and concept of the bad and the ugliness. So this is basically the definition of the axiology. We can say the summarized definition of the axiology. Okay, third is basically epistemology. When we say epistemology, is the philosophical investigation of the nature of knowledge. So as compared to the metaphysics and the axiology, in the case of epistemology, it's basically the study of the knowledge itself and the truth. And when we say truth, of the difference between the knowledge, opinion, and the truth and the fallacy. So this is basically the study of the knowledge. So we can say these are the three branches, these are the three domains of the philosophical ideas remain topics of discussion for all the philosophers of all times. They were in search of the answer of these questions. Okay, if you look at the metaphysics, when we say metaphysics, it's basically what what's what. So when we say what's what, it means it involves some questions. Questions of what is real, if we consider something real, whether it's real or not, and what is being. If we talk about the God, the universe and the human being, when we considering them real, if they are real and if they are, whether they are existing or not, then is there a purpose to our being? I mean, as a human being, is there any purpose of our life? We are here, and what will be happen when we are die? What is the self, and how we define the self? Whether it's a spirit, it's a soul, it's a brain, it's the mind. So this is also the question of what's what. Then, is there a God? This is basically the question as being raised by all the philosophers of all of time. I mean, when you say what's what about the human being, what's what about the God? So if we say that there's a God, is there a God, or do the God exist or not? Then do human beings, however, define the free will? I mean, how they possess the free will? If we are here and calamities or the evils are being afflicted to us, so do we have a free will to control the evil of the life? So we can say, so do the human beings have the free will in living into this world? So these are the questions have been we can say asked or have been raised by the philosopher of the different times. Okay, then axiology, or we can say the value ethics. So when we say value or the axiology, it's basically we mean ethics. And when we say value or the axiology, it's basically what is ethics, what is good, what is right, and what is the nature of value, what is the nature of good, what is the nature of right thing. Then how descriptively and evaluatively these concept of good or the concept of value can be defined, and which claims the philosophers have draw or they have established in order to answer their basic fundamental questions. And then which are the ethical principles involved into the domain of the axiology, then what is against self, what is good and bad for the self, then what is self well-being, and if you say what is self-satisfaction, and the knowledge and the virtue. I mean, what is the relationship between the knowledge and the virtue? Especially we talk about Socratic philosophy, there is a deep relationship between the knowledge and the virtue. Okay, the second branch is the epistemology. Inshallah, we'll discuss these all these domains one by one, that how the philosophers have discussed these domains according to their points. But right now we are just giving a defined idea of the all branches of the philosophy. Okay, the epistemology is basically what is knowledge. First of all, what is knowledge? I mean, when we say knowledge, so how it's can be called knowledge? It's not opinion, it's not belief, it's not the information. Then we say, if knowledge, what is the source of that knowledge? I mean, is there one source or some other sources of the knowledge also exist? Then if we say we believe in some knowledge, we believe in some perception, we believe in some logical thing, is this true or false? I mean, we can call it the criteria of the justifies or the justified true belief. Then if we look at the justified true belief, how we can critically analyze this justified true belief, how the critical thinking is being involved into the finding out the nature of the justified true belief. And then how we can make our approach, how we can make our theory, and how we can make our decision based on the any justified true belief, that is called knowledge. Okay, now after if we look at up till this point, if we look at the summary, first of all we discuss what is the definition of philosophy, who the philosophers are, and then thirdly we have discussed which branches of the philosophy remained a point of discussion for the philosophers of the all time. Now the fourth point, that why should we study philosophy? Okay, we are discussing about the importance of this philosophy. Why should we study philosophy? So I have mentioned that what the Socrates said about the about the philosophy, he says that unexamined life is not worth living. And what the Bernard Lusser said, he said that science is what you know. I mean, scientists study is basically what you know, and philosophy is what you don't know. And philosophy is all about what you claim that you know but you don't know. So he himself says, when it comes to the philosophy, I don't know nearly enough. And being a philosopher, I don't know anything is enough to being claiming myself as a philosopher. So the value of philosophy is in fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. And the man who has no tincture of the philosophy goes through life just like a prison. He is imprisoned into the basis of the derived common sense information from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation. I mean, he believes what the other people say. He believes what the other people are giving him information. So, and from the conviction which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or the consent of his deliberate reason. I mean, he is not living a life with a reason. Just I said earlier, Einstein, that he said, if you want to look beyond your own vision, farther than your own vision, you have to look through the shoulder of a giant. So these philosophers and these thinkers are basically giving you the idea just like a giant giving you a view. So we can say कि अगर आपको बियॉन्ड आपकी अपनी इंफॉर्मेशन जो कि आप सराउंडिंग से ले रहे हैं उससे हट के अगर आपको कोई इन्फॉर्मेशन चाहिए है तो वो आपको फिलोसॉफिकल थिंकिंग से बियॉन्ड मेटाफिजिकल रियलिटी से अगर आप सोच रहे हैं तो तभी आप उसकी रीजनिंग को उसकी लॉजिकल थिंकिंग को जो है वो एक्वायर कर सकेंगे. सो दिस इज बेसिकली वी कैन से सम हाउ द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ फिलोसफी एंड वी लुक ऑल द फिलोसफर जितने भी फिलोसफर्स थे दे वर द extraordinary logical people of their community. So we can say कि ये लोग जो थे ये जो भी बात करते थे वो लॉजिक से करते थे और उस परसेप्शन और उस इंफॉर्मेशन से जो कि उस वक्त एग्जिस्ट कर रही थी सोसाइटी के अंदर उससे हट के बात करते थे, उससे बियॉन्ड बात कर रहे थे. तो इफ़ यू आर हैविंग अ फिलोसॉफिकल एप्टीट्यूड सो यू आर बेसिकली हैविंग अ रीजनेबल लॉजिकल स्किल to look at the things, to the nature of the thing. So this is basically importance of the studying philosophy or learning philosophy. Okay, which are the questions being involved usually into the philosophy? First of all, who we are and why we are here. As already discussed, it's basically the domain of the metaphysics. And what is the meaning of life? Again, the physics. Why is it possible to know anything at all? This is a epistemological question. Should we know the things or not? And what is the meaning of existence? Again, epistemology. Does my daily conduct matter in the long run? What happens to me at my death? I mean, what is the nature of my life and what will be happen to me if I die? If I do believe my soul will also be expire or not, my soul is also being finite or infinite. So this is basically the question of the philosophical question. And then existing and conception of God. I mean, do the God exist? And if he exists, what is the concept? I mean, it's a dualistic, it's a monistic, or if it's a materialistic, or the type of God, concept of God we can acquire through the philosophical ideas. And what is good and what is bad? And how can I know the good and the bad? I mean, this is again the epistemological question. And how should I be treating others? How can I know? I mean, if I'm treating others in a inappropriate way, in a not a valuable way, so the same I should expect from the others as well. This is basically the axiological domain of the philosophy. Okay. When we look at the methods of the investigation of the all philosophers, I'll be just going with quickly with the method that all the philosophers have used this. We can say somehow they basically look at the philosophical concept this way. The method of investigation involves the first of all, if you look at the nature, the philosophical thinking of the philosophers, they basically investigate. First of all the philosophers have investigate the nature, causes and the principles of the reality, knowledge and the values. and this is not being done in a descriptive way or a theoretical way, but rather on the logical way with an argument, rather than the empirical methods are there into their society. I mean, इसके आप example ऐसे ले सकते हैं. If you look at the Socratic, because the Socratic era was basically a rebellious era जिसने काउंटर किया था उन कॉन्सेप्ट्स को जो कि ऑलरेडी इंफॉर्मेशन की बेस के ऊपर उनकी सोसाइटी के अंदर एग्जिस्ट कर रहे थे. तो वो कभी भी उस एम्पिरिकल इंफॉर्मेशन को एक्सेप्ट नहीं करते विदाउट रीजनिंग, विदाउट लॉजिक. सो वो क्या करते थे कि वो अपनी जो है वो नेचर को, अपने आर्ग्यूमेंट्स को और अपने लॉजिकल थिंकिंग की बेसिस के ऊपर चीज़ों को एक्सप्लोर करते थे कि अगर कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ गॉड है, इसका स्टार्ट कहाँ पे है, और अगर स्टार्ट है तो वो किस तरह से हुआ, क्या वो कोई एक सब्सटेंस था जिसने मुख्तलिफ फॉर्म्स ली, या उस एक सब्सटेंस से मजीद सब्सटेंस बने थे. तो ये फिलोसॉफिकल मेथड जो है वो इस तरह से एक थ्योरी को, एक कॉन्सेप्ट को लेके फिर उसकी नेचर को जो है वो आइडेंटिफाई करता है. देन वो सिर्फ आइडेंटिफाई नहीं करते बल्कि उसके साथ क्या है, दे ऑल्सो involves the study of the ultimate nature of the existence. I mean, they don't only not look at the nature, but they also look into the ultimate nature. I mean, what is, if we say that cause and effect theory of the Aristotle, so Aristotle has not given the cause and effect theory of the material world. He also has given the cause and effect theory of the first cause. He says जो भी एक हैवियर जो कॉज होता है वो इफेक्ट करता है अपने से जो है नेचर में और वर्थ के अंदर अपने से लो जो उसका मटेरियल होता है. तो दे बेसिकली कॉज एंड इफेक्ट, and if we look at this series of cause and effect, this basically go into the ultimate nature, that is the first cause. So उनका सिर्फ क्वेश्चन ये नहीं होता कि आप नेचर को आइडेंटिफाई करें, उसको जान रहे हैं, बल्कि वो उसकी अल्टीमेट नेचर, उसकी फाउंडेशन को भी जो है वो फाइंड आउट करते हैं. ऑल्सो देयर एग्जिस्टेंस, देयर रियलिटी, एंड ऑल्सो द नॉलेज ऑफ एंड गुडनेस एज दैट इज डिस्कवरेबल बाय द ह्यूमन रीजनिंग और नॉट. थर्ड थिंग जो कि फिलोसफर्स हमेशा इस मेथड को यूज़ करते रहे, वो चाहे वो एक वन इंडिविजुअल से उन्होंने किया या उन्होंने एक पूरी थ्योरी के साथ किया, एक ग्रुप ऑफ फिलोसफर्स ने किया, they always the search for knowledge and truth through rational and the critical inquiry. I mean, वो किसी भी कॉन्सेप्ट को जो उन्हें इन्फॉर्मेशन दी जाती थी उसको एक्सेप्ट नहीं करते थे, बल्कि वो उसको क्रिटिकली एनालाइज करते थे, डिस्कस करते थे. इफ वी लुक एट द डायलेक्टिक मेथड ऑफ द सोक्रेटिस, तो वो कभी भी उनका आपस में जो है कंसेंसस नहीं होता था, बल्कि वो डिफरेंस ऑफ ओपिनियन के साथ मजीद जो है वो डायलॉग्स जनरेट करते थे डायलेक्टिक मेथड से. सो वो क्रिटिकली एक दूसरे के साथ क्वेश्चंस करते थे और उनको आंसर करते थे. सो द फिलोसफर्स ऑलवेज सर्च फॉर द नॉलेज एंड ट्रूथ थ्रू द रैशनल एंड द क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग और द क्रिटिकल इंक्वायरी. So critical thinking is basically involved into the process of the investigation of the philosophy. Okay, then third is basically the careful thought about the fundamental nature of the world. I mean, they also look at the world, its nature, its cosmological order, its teleological order, its deontological order, its right, its wrong, and they also find out the nature, and also they look for the grounds for the human knowledge. I mean, if we know how we know, and if we know what are the basic nature of that knowledge and the evaluation of the human conduct, they also evaluate the human conduct as well. If we say that it's a truthful, how it's truthful, and if it's a truthful, what is the fallacy in opposite to the truth. So ultimately what they do in the method of the philosophy, they says the knowledge is to the knower. I mean, if you look at the knowledge of the Socrates, he says unexamined life is not worth living. And if we look at the Plato's, he says that the dualistic form of the nature of things is basically the nature of the reality of the universe, that is the reality of this world. And if you look at Aristotle, he says cause and effect theory. So ultimately the nature of knowledge is basically what is the knower knows. जो शख्स जानता है उसके लिए वो reality जो है वो उसका knowledge है. Okay ji, now how the philosophical investigation has been conducted by the philosophers. First of all, they investigate into the nature of things, just like God, universe, human society, and then they basically give a comprehensive system of the belief. They not only give the investigation into the nature of things, but they also give a comprehensive system of belief. Just take the example of the Socratic dialectic method. तो वो जब भी किसी की नेचर को या किसी नेचर की रियलिटी को फाइंड आउट करते थे, तो सबसे पहले वो देखते थे कि उसका नेचर क्या है. I mean, the concept of God in the Greek time, जबकि philosophers, जबकि Socrates और Plato का time था, तो वहाँ पे जो concept of God था, the gods were like human beings. They were also the rulers as well. They were powerful. They also reflect the human attributes as well. So they always raise question, if these are the gods, then why should we believe them as a god? Because they are also human beings. They also reflect the same characters of the human beings. So why should we accept them as a god? So उन्होंने उसको फिर काउंटर किया, और किस तरह से किया? उन्होंने कहा they give a system of belief. If they are god, then they how they demonstrate the qualities and the attributes of the god. And then thirdly, same question, the metaphysical question of the concept of God, nature of things, then comprehensive belief, and then seeking truth by reasoning. I mean, they used to ask, if they are God, then why not they demonstrate the qualities of the God? So same is the question with the axiological question. When they see that, they say that the truth or the beauty. So they first of all they say, what is the nature of the beauty? Anything that attracts the mind. So this is basically their knowledge. And when we say this is knowledge, so how do we can reflect that the beauty is a good thing? Because whenever we saw beauty, it gives us a fragrance. It gives us a good feeling. So this is basically the comprehensive system of belief. And then seeking truth by the reasoning. They also seek the truth, not given by the perception of the other, the information of the others, but क्या करते थे कि वो अपनी reasoning की basis के ऊपर उसको find out करते थे कि okay, if this is beauty, this is truthfulness, so if this is truthfulness, this is beauty, how this is beauty and how this is truthfulness. So if I mean say कि अगर आपने एक जो अच्छा एक कौवा देखा आपने, और वो एक कौवा जो है वो काला है, तो आप कह सकते हैं कि जो है वो सारे कौवे काले हैं. क्यों? इसलिए कि आपने उसके बाद जितने भी कौवे देखे वो काले थे. ठीक है, तो एक कौवे की बेसिस के ऊपर आपने अपनी लाइफ के अंदर जितने भी कौवे देखे, वो इंडक्टिव मेथड की बेसिस के ऊपर आप कह रहे हैं कि आप जब भी अपने आसपास सराउंडिंग्स में जब कौवा देखा, तो दिस इज द रीजनिंग कि एक कौवा काला है, और आपने इससे पहले जितने कौवे देखे उस एक घंटे के अंदर, उस फेज ऑफ लाइफ के अंदर, तो वो काले थे. तो आपने उससे ये रीजनिंग निकाली कि कौवा जो है वो काला होता है, और द क्रोज आर ब्लैक. सी इंडक्टिव हो गया. अब आप जब भी कहीं पर उस क्रिएशन को या उस स्पीशी को देखेंगे, तो आप कहेंगे द क्रो इज ब्लैक. तो ये आपका डिडक्टिव मेथड होगा कि जितने भी, चूंकि आपका इंडक्टिव मेथड ये आइडेंटिफाई कर रहा है कि ऑल द क्रोज आर ब्लैक, तो इसलिए उस बेसिस के ऊपर, उस रीजनिंग की बेसिस के ऊपर आपने डिडक्ट ये किया, डिडक्टिव मेथड की बेसिस के ऊपर ये फाइंड आउट किया कि चूंकि आपने जितने भी आपकी जो आपकी ये 5 सेंसेस हैं, जैसे जब भी जो कौवा देखा या क्रो देखा, वो दैट इट वाज अ ब्लैक, सो दैट इज डिडक्टेबल दैट ऑल द क्रोज आर ब्लैक. या इसके आप एग्जांपल ऐसे ले सकते हैं कि अगर एक थैले से आपने एक कॉइन निकाला, और उसके बाद बाकी भी जो आपने कॉइन्स निकाले वो सेम फीचर के थे और सेम नेचर के थे और सेम साइज के थे, तो आप कहते हो कि आपने इस थैले के जो कॉइन्स वाला जो बैग है, इससे आपने एक कॉइन निकाला. दिस इज इंडक्टिव. बट व्हेन यू से दिस बैग contain coins of 10, coins of 10 rupees, coins of $10, or coins of 10 euro, so this is basically, you can basically giving a deductive method. सो ये बेसिकली आपका क्या है कि वो जब भी किसी चीज़ को फिलोसोफर जो है वो आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं तो सबसे पहले वो उसकी नेचर को देखते हैं, उसके बाद उसके सिस्टम ऑफ बिलीफ के ऊपर, उसको रीजनिंग की बेसिस के ऊपर उसको एनालाइज करते हैं कि क्या ये जो है ये चीज़ इससे पहले इंडक्टिव मेथड के ऊपर, डिडक्टिव मेथड के ऊपर क्या ये सही है या गलत है, और उसके बाद उसको वह नेम देते हैं रियलिटी का और नॉलेज का नेम देते हैं. एंड देन दे ऑल्सो रिलाई ऑन द सोर्सेज ऑफ नॉलेज. जस्ट आई मेंशन अर्लियर that they also, when they are saying the crow is black, so the source of knowledge is their naked eyes. They have seen the crow as a black, so they basically rely on the source of the knowledge. And then they also give the idea of true and false is what the knower knows. I mean, there was a skeptic school of thought who says that there is no ultimate truth or false exist. I mean, everything one person knows, it's basically his or her own perception. So they say that true and false is basically what the knower knows. जैसे आपने देखा चीज़ों को, आपने उसकी नेचर को देखा, आपने उसको आइडेंटिफाई किया, आपने उसको रीजनिंग दी, दैट इज बेसिकली योर नॉलेज. एंड द एंड नॉलेज शुड बी द रैशनल. आप जो भी उसको नॉलेज को नाम दे रहे हैं, that should be based on the argument, that should be based on the reason, and that should be the logical. So this is basically the philosophical investigation of the philosophy. Okay, now if we look at the next point, that is basically the characteristics of the different school of philosophy. So I guess we can just have main features of these school of philosophy, and inshallah we can discuss into the detail in the next lecture. So we just look at the main school of philosophy as we have already indicated in the first lecture. We can just go with their characteristic, the main characteristics of the school of philosophy. Okay, as I mentioned, there are four school of philosophies. One is the Greek philosophy, which we can say the modern philosophy based on the Greek philosophy. And second is the Indian philosophy, and also Indian philosophy also being, we can say, having the same features of the Chinese philosophy, and then the Islamic philosophy. So if you look at the characteristics of the Greek philosophy, so we have to look at the different eras of the Greek philosophy, because each era has its own characteristics, its own reflection on the modern philosophy. So if we look at the dark ages of the Greek philosophy, it's basically fatalistic philosophy. यानी ये fate पे believe करने वाली philosophy थी कि जो कुछ भी gods ने कह दिया है, जो उन्होंने mention कर दिया है, जो उन्होंने कह दिया है, that is basically your fate and you have to follow that. So the dark ages of the Greek history or the Greek era. So we can say this cannot be called a pure philosophical idea, because most of the philosophers say it's a dark time, because इस time के अंदर कुछ भी लिखने या पढ़ने का या thinking का कोई process नहीं चल रहा था. दो कि बहुत सारी ऐसी चीज़ें discover हुई हैं जिसमें जो आपके vowels हैं, जो आपकी जो writings हैं, जो आपकी machine जो है वो writings हैं, या my latest जो आपकी writings हैं, they have been discovered from the dark ages. इसी तरह से ह्यूमर है, हेस्टिड्स की जो राइटिंग्स हैं ये आपको डार्क एजेस की मिलती हैं. बट ओवरऑल दिस इज बीइंग कॉल्ड एज अ डार्क एजेस बिकॉज मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल बिलीव ऑन व्हाट दे हैव बीन इन्फॉर्म्ड बाय देयर गॉड्स, बाय देयर कम्युनिटी ऑफ द गॉड्स. दिस इज कॉल्ड फेटलिस्टिक philosophy. Okay, then purely the classical, purely we can say the जो एक philosophical जो थिंकिंग है या जो प्रोसेस है वो स्टार्ट होता है आपका प्री क्लासिकल इरा में, जिसको कि हम ये कह सकते हैं थेलिस और थेल्स ऑफ माइलेटस को कहा जाता है. ही वाज द फर्स्ट पर्सन हु इज बीइंग कॉल्ड एज ए फाउंडर फिलोसोफर, या पहला द फर्स्ट फिलोसोफर जिसको कहा जाता है. सो दो के फिलोसफी का जो वर्ड है फर्स्ट टाइम वो पाइथागोरस ने यूज़ किया था. ही इज़ ऑल्सो प्री सोक्रेटिक फिलोसोफर. सो लेकिन क्या है कि प्री क्लासिकल फिलोसोफर्स आर बीइंग रियली कंसीडर्ड द फिलोसोफर्स. सो इन फिलोसोफर्स को जो है वो आप कह सकते हैं कि इस फिलोसोफिकल इरा की जो एक कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है वो है दे वर नेचुरलिस्टिक फिलोसोफर्स, यानी वो नेचर से हर चीज़ की रीजनिंग को जो है वो कनेक्ट करते थे. वो कहते थे कि फेट कुछ नहीं है, आपके लिए फेट जो है वो डेस्टिन्ड नहीं है या मेंशन नहीं है, या आपके वो नहीं इन्फॉर्मेशन या वो आपकी फेट नहीं है जो गॉड्स आपको कह रहे हैं, बल्कि हर चीज़ का एक कॉज होता है। आई मीन बिफोर दैट जो एक कॉन्सेप्ट था कि फेट जो है वो आपकी वही है जो आपके गॉड्स ने आपके लिए लिख दी है, बट से नहीं, देर जब भी कोई चीज़ अच्छी या बुरी होती है, चाहे वो आपकी मेटाफिजिक या आपकी फिजिकल वर्ल्ड के अंदर है, आपकी सोसाइटी के अंदर है, या ह्यूमन नेचर के अंदर है, ये इन सब की कोई ना कोई नेचुरल रीजंस होती हैं। तो दे वर कॉल्ड एज नेचुरलिस्ट फिलोसोफर्स। Just like if you look at the philosophy of the Thales, he says that जो origin of life है वो एक monistic origin है, और या आप कह सकते हैं कि the first cause जो है, या जो पहला जो आप कह सकते हैं substance जो था, वो एक cause था जिससे life का जो है कि beginning हुई, और उसको वो कहते हैं कि basically because water is the human need। अब उसको reasoning वो क्या दे रहे हैं कि वाटर इज अ बेसिकली ह्यूमन नीड, तो एसेंशियल नीड है। इस बेसिस के ऊपर वाटर कैन बी द फर्स्ट कॉज और द मोनेस्टिक कॉज ऑफ द ओरिजिन ऑफ द लाइफ। इस तरह से बाकी फिलोसफर्स का भी इस तरह इसी बेसिस के ऊपर जो उनकी आर्गुमेंटेशन थी, और वो हमेशा नेचुरल कॉज को ओरिजिन ऑफ लाइफ, रनिंग ऑफ लाइफ और जो नॉलेज की बेसिस है उसके ऊपर उसको रिलेट करते थे। सेकेंडली जो क्लासिकल एरा है, दैट इज़ वी कैन कॉल सोक्रेटिक एरा, और इसको हम रैशनल, क्रिटिकल और साइंटिफिक एरा कह सकते हैं। बहुत सारी थेरीज जो आपकी फ़िलासफ़ी की थेरीज हैं जो आज एग्जिस्ट कर रही हैं, दे आर बीइंग इनिशिएटेड, इंशाल्लाह आई विल डिस्कस इट इन अ फुल फ्लेज्ड लेक्चर, द फिलासफ़ी एंड देयर कंट्रीब्यूशन। जितनी भी थेरीज जो अब मॉडर्न फिलासफी के अंदर स्टडी की जाती हैं, मार्क्सिज्म है, मटीरियलिज्म है, ह्यूमनिज्म है, या आपकी जो है रिलेटिविज्म है, यूनिवर्सलिज्म है, ये तमाम के तमाम आइडिया दे आर बीइंग इनिशिएटेड बाय द क्लासिकल फिलोसोफर। द क्लासिकल फिलोसोफर व्हेन वी से नॉट ओनली द सोक्रेटिक या सोक्रेटिस फिलोसोफर है, बल्कि इसमें हम इसको इंक्लूड करेंगे सोक्रेटिस, एरिस्टोटल, प्लेटो इन सोक्रेटिस, उसके स्टूडेंट प्लेटो एंड प्लेटो स्टूडेंट एरिस्टोटल। तो देयर आर सो मेनी अदर स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ द सोक्रेटिस एज वेल, बट चूँकि जब जो फिलोसफी के अंदर कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन की बात की जाती है, तो इन तीन फिलोसफर्स की क्लासिकल एरा के जो है फिलोसफर कहा जाता है। अच्छा, इन फिलोसफर्स की जो स्पेशलिटी क्या है, दे आर बेसिकली रैशनल, दे आर क्रिटिक एंड दे लुक इनटू द नेचर। जब भी रीजनिंग करते थे तो वो साइंटिफिक और थियोरेटिकल दोनों को मिला के रीजनिंग देते थे। अच्छा जी, पोस्ट जो सोक्रेटिक फिलोसफी है, जो पोस्ट क्लासिकल जो फिलोसफी है, वो आपकी हेलेनिस्टिक फिलोसफी है, और हेलेनिस्टिक फिलोसफी इज टोटली, इसकी जो कैरेक्टरिस्टिक है वो टोटली ऑपोजिट है विद द क्लासिकल एरा। इसको आप कह सकते हैं दिस इज मोर स्पिरिचुअल, and it's not rational just like the classical philosophers. It's more spiritual, more emotional, more personal, more human and humanistic philosophy है। यानी वो बड़े बड़े कॉन्सेप्ट, यूनिवर्स को, कॉस्मोलॉजी को, टीलियोलॉजी को डिस्कस करने के बजाय ह्यूमन इमोशंस को ज़्यादातर इस फिलोसफी के अंदर डिस्कस किया गया, ह्यूमन स्पिरिचुअल नीड को जो है वो ज़्यादा डिस्कस किया गया, और इस वजह से किया गया कि इस एरा के ऊपर ज़्यादा जो इम्पैक्ट है वो इंडियन फिलोसफी और पर्शियन जो कल्चर था उसका बहुत इम्पैक्ट हुआ था। उसके बाद जो पोस्ट हेलेनिस्टिक फिलोसफी है, दैट इज रोमन फिलोसफी, एंड रोमन फिलोसफी हियर यू कैन से द रिलीजन हैज बीन इन्वॉल्व्ड इनटू द फिलोसफी। सो हियर द डिबेट ऑफ रीजन वर्सेस इमोशंस ये स्टार्ट होती है, और फिर बाद में यही जो डिबेट है वो मुअतज़िलास और अशारित्स की बेसिस के ऊपर रीज़न वर्सेस रेवलेशन की डिबेट के ऊपर भी जाती है। सो द रोमन फिलोसफी, वी कैन से द मेन कंपोनेंट ऑफ द रोमन फिलोसफी इज बेसिकली मोर रिलीजियस एंड just like Hellenistic philosophy, more emotional as compared to the rational. So यहाँ पर एक डिबेट भी जो है स्टार्ट हो जाती है जिसमें इमोशंस वर्सेस रैशनैलिटी जो है उसके ऊपर डिबेट भी जो है वो इस फिलोसफिकल एरा के अंदर नज़र आती है। ओके, देन जो वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी है, जिसको के यानी आप ये कह सकते हो कि आज की वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी इज़ बेसिकली द समराइज्ड फॉर्म और द वी कैन से द डिराइव्ड फॉर्म ऑफ ऑल दीज फिलोसफीज। سو یہ آپ کی ویسٹرن فلاسفی جو ہے یہ زیادہ تر آپ کی امپیریسزم کے اوپر بیس کرتی ہے، ریشنل ہے، اور زیادہ تر وہ تھیریز جو کہ پچھلے فلاسفرز نے دی ہوئی ہیں انہی کی ڈیبیٹ کے اوپر جو ہے یہ ڈسکس کر کے اور اسی کی بیسس کے اوپر جو ہے وہ تھیریز بناتی ہیں.